With the Dragon Ball community torn on whether or not something devious is going on involving the Grand Priest and his angels, the fact remains that something deeper is brewing within the void, as the Tournament of Power displayed the first ever elimination in witnessing the eradication of Universe number 9, but was this a part of the Grand Priest's plan all along, or are what we're looking at right now simply just a coincidence and nothing more? On this video, we're going to be taking a look at both sides of the spectrum and seeing what it would be like if the Grand Priest is simply playing a neutral part, and in seeing what would happen if the idea is true in the fact that the Grand Priest and his children were indeed evil. And joining me to tackle this subject is Dragon Ball YouTuber EmoshIsLIVE, as we encourage you guys to sit back and watch through the entire video, as many different scenarios will be brought into play, alongside sharing your thoughts down the comment section below as to what you believe is happening behind the scenes involving the Grand Priest and his children. And for those who are not subscribed to the channel, be sure to go on ahead and punch that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way you guys can be notified on whenever a Dragon Ball video is posted onto the channel, hashtag notification squad, as we dive deeper in seeing on whether or not the Grand Priest and his children do in fact have a hidden agenda. Now Emosh, welcome back to the channel, and I do want to go on ahead and discuss this further with you as we spoke off camera about this. Now, right off the bat, I wanted to ask you and get your thoughts on the following, since we're going to be covering both scenarios on whether or not the Grand Priest is not evil, and of course whether or not he is. So I wanted to start off with just the overall topic of him actually being evil. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the idea that perhaps maybe the Grand Priest has a hidden agenda, as many have speculated, and the idea that for me, I don't think that the Grand Priest is in fact an evil character and or will become a villain, because if you look at it like this, right, hypothetically speaking, if the Grand Priest is in fact evil and he does have a hidden agenda, and in fact he does turn out to be an enemy to the universe, the question is, how do we stop him? Even with Goku, Jiren, Vegeta, Toppo, all of the other fighters, and Hakaishin, and even angels, that, in and of itself, I don't think that they would possess the necessary strength to combat such an opponent like the Daishinkan. The Daishinkan was stated to be one of the top 5 fighters in the entire multiverse, if anything, the top fighter. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the entire situation, on whether or not you think that there is a sinister motive behind the Grand Priest.
Well, I would say at most, or at best, it kind of goes back to when the Daishinkan was revealed to be one of the top 5 strongest fighters in the multiverse, or possess the highest battle powers by Whis, as referred to by Whis, and in the manga, they refer to him as being definitively the strongest, character by default in the entire multiverse. Then recently we find out that there's a mortal that surpasses the Hakaishin. Then, little by little, we're kind of finding things out that kind of pertain to just power overall, right? Then this whole concept, the whole new poster with Goku's trying to reach a new level. However you guys want to proceed, that is up to you. So little by little, it kind of seems like we're getting something, or we're getting somewhere that pertains to where they would want to take this. If the Daishinkan was in fact quote unquote evil, I personally don't think he is, because it goes back, well, how do you oppose him? Do you seal him away? Is there something to portray as to where he can be defeated? Do they have a weakness? Do the angels themselves have a kind of weakness that's yet to be exploited? There's so many things, left to be unanswered, and then we're quick to jump the gun and just assume that he's evil based on a type of judgment that's being passed down by the gods, or by the angels, or by the higher ups, right? So I think it's kind of, from a morals perspective, you would kind of deem them as being evil. However, if you look at it from a perspective where, from a characteristic standpoint, you gotta ask yourself, well, do lower ranked mortal levels, for example, Universe 9 with a mortal level ranking of 1.86, when you're supposed to have a mortal ranking level of 7, let's say, for example, right? And you're not meeting those expectations that have been passed down to you when you're appointed this position, right? And then, can you really say that it's unjust for someone with a mortal level ranking of 1.86 to be erased, right? No, you can't say that. That's not fair. So when you look at it from that standpoint, it's kind of, well, no, they're not evil. And even if he does have some kind of hidden agenda, even if there is something, behind the works, it's as a result of what's been taking place in this timeline, where these gods and stuff like that are running amok, where more than half of them are not doing what they're supposed to do. And it's fair. It's just about being just. So I would say, that's probably the best way to look at it, if anything.
I think for me, it'll be a really cool concept to have this come about, because this would remind me of the Bible and seeing what happened during the biblical times of Lucifer having to be the fallen angel and having to pretty much manipulate the other angels in joining him in his crusade to oppose God, in which, even basing off this, we see that the community, most people are assuming the fact that maybe the Daishinkan wants to pretty much further his agenda in taking over as the Omni King per se, and trying to destroy the Omni King. Now, me and you can both agree that the Omni King isn't quite intelligent as we all first assumed he would be, as being the supreme leader. I mean, he acts like a child, he conducts himself like a child, and having to have your fate, your life, your existence, your tier lie in the hands of a child is terrifying. So the only logical way I can see this go about is if the Daishinkan has a motive to perhaps maybe take over as the Omni King, perhaps because he's sick and tired of having to, you know, govern by the Omni King's rules and having to follow what he says because he's a child. However, that goes back to what I said. If the Daishinkan, and this is a big hypothetical, if the Daishinkan is in fact, you know, a villain or, you know, someone that, you know, has sinister motives, how do you oppose him? Even with, you know, Goku's goofy Limit Breaker transformation, Super Saiyan Blue, Jiren's power, Vegito, if you want to go down that road, there is no logical way to you know, put this person down, especially if the Daishinkan is supposed to have, you know, one of the highest battle powers in the entire multiverse. So what I wanted to ask you is, in pertains to the Omni King having to, you know, take the Grand Priest as a role of a referee, because that's what the Grand Priest is on a grand scheme of things. I feel like he is the referee. He's overlooking as to what's happening. He's putting out the rules. This is for the Omni King's enjoyment. This is for Zenchan's enjoyment. And yes, they are the ones that possess, you know, the powers to erase, as we saw with Universe number 9. So what I wanted to ask you is, do you think the Grand Priest is the one that, you know, created these rules and, you know, allowed these rules to sink in with the Omni King? Because so far, according to a few people within the community, it was stated that the Omni King isn't really the one making the rules. The Omni King just said, let's have a tournament, and everything else falls in the Daishinkan's hands. So do you think that there is sort of like a hidden agenda because of the idea that the Grand Priest is the one making all the rules and not the Omni King, because maybe perhaps the Omni King would have made the rules a bit more different? Or do you think that this is simply put to where the Daishinkan is, you know, implementing these rules just to have like an even playing field? Or do you think that he's, you know, putting these rules come about, like for example, the complete eradication of a universe, just to fulfill his agenda in seeing other mortals and Hakaishin perish? What do you think about that?
Well, then you gotta ask yourself, what motive is there for him? What enjoyment factor does he get just to see universes get erased or Hakaishins get erased, right? Right. I mean, there's really no purpose. He definitively, by default, he's above them anyway, so who really gives a shit, right? So another thing to consider is the fact that the Daishinkan literally said that the Omni King has often said that there are far too many universes. Yes. And you have to ask yourself, even naturally, when we first find out that there's, you know, that there's this many universes, okay, but why? I mean, even me myself, when I found out, right, when Reese explained it, when they first met Champa and stuff like that, when they first met Champa and Vados, and they revealed that there was, you know, this many universes, I myself asked, well, why? Why is there this many universes? For what? What purpose does it actually serve, right? So, naturally, you would think that, yes, to an extent, that yes, perhaps, you know, it would make sense that there are other universes, but in terms of Dragon Ball, this is the first time we're seeing something like that, so why? Right? So after you ask yourself why, you can't really come up with an answer. You have to ask yourself, well, why would the Daishinkan really care about erasing people just for the enjoyment factor, right? He doesn't really seem to care. He's just fulfilling what the Omni King wants. And perhaps maybe, as some people said, eliminating competition, potential threats that may come about. What do you think about that? Well, then it goes back to the fact that as to why there's a mortal still existing to this day that surpasses the Hakaishin. Why hasn't he been erased yet? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it still goes back. Like, I don't think that this mortal is there just for Goku to rival him or surpass him. There has to be a definitive reason why they allowed a mortal to become this strong to begin with, right? So there's a potential backstory that you have to ask yourself, right? So I don't think that they're honestly taking this kind of perspective, because again, it goes back, how would you freaking oppose this person? How would you? He literally has potentially all the angels on his side by default, right? Even if the gods of destruction wanted to oppose him, even if Goku rallied everybody together and said, guys, you know, let my people, you know, all this other stuff, like, let's oppose them, right? So it's like, well, he can literally snap his fingers and everybody's dead. So like, it doesn't really matter. And the fact that as to why he would want to oppose the Omni King, well, okay, it's bad enough he had one to deal with, right? Not that he cared so much. He clearly is content with working for the Omni King. It doesn't seem to have any kind of problem. So what agenda can there possibly be? Right? Obviously, yes, Toriyama or Tortaro, they could just create one out of,
Absolutely,
just pull one out. Yeah, so there's that perspective, but I don't understand where the basis of this is coming back from. Where even us, we've done discussions like this before, where we talked about, is the Daishinkan evil?
Yeah, actually, we went back and I think it was during February we spoke about this, and the idea that the song possibly had hidden meaning, and oddly enough, we come back to this, several months later, and
once again,
as you just said, the Grand Priest already has the highest position. He's the one, making the rules and giving out the orders in the name of Zeno, right? And as I said, if he were to become evil, then indeed he would be the strongest villain by any means, even far superseding Merge Zamasu in terms of feats, because this is something that we've never seen before, and I don't think we'd ever see before. But even with that being said, we saw what happened with the Angel of Universe number 9. People were saying, well, he smirked, he smiled. I actually said this in my previous video. Mojito was an angel that never truly liked the god of destruction Sidra and the Kaioshin Ro. He always found them to be disgusting, and he never agreed with their methods. He was always there, and he was always kind of like annoyed with what they were doing, as seen during the recruitment process as Sidra Hokkaido an entire city. We see how the angel was very frustrated. But with that being said, I just want to get this out the way. So do you think by having Mojito smile very sinisterly, do you think it was a sign of relief? Or do you think that maybe their plan all along in trying to destroy a Hakaishin and an entire, a universe of species actually came about? What do you think about that?
All right, since you brought that up, right? It's clear as day, Mojito did not like this universe he was serving under.
Nope.
Right? But the fact that he still did it showcases that he's still loyal to his position. Now, the Angels by default are the strongest class and the strongest tier aside from Zeno.
Right.
Right? Far above the Hakaishin. And that's scary. Okay? I mean, that's freaking scary. So you take that into consideration. You add the fact that Mojito still is serving under these gods of destruction, serving under this Kaioshin, right? With no objections. Okay? And the same thing could be said for every other universe, right? So you take that into consideration, then you think and you ask yourself, well, even if they were evil, what would be the purpose? There is no purpose. They're still living up to their position as angels, right? Despite how strong they are, okay, they are and it goes back to what happens when the universe is erased, when that god of destruction that he serves is erased or something happens to him, they cease to function, right? Which I'm sure we're going to see in the next episode.
Right.
Hopefully they'll touch up on that. So the fact that they cease to function kind of tells you that they're created, not born, but they're created. So by default, because they're created with a certain purpose in mind. And Mojito is a good example as to the fact that he has been serving that purpose. Now, their jobs, I would imagine, is to serve under the god of destruction. I would say to an extent they are there to guide the gods of destruction, so that way, to make sure that they do their job. However, they don't have to force them to do that, right?
Right.
And as we've seen this time and time again, aside from the 4 universes who have been doing their things, and ironically enough, these 4 universes who are exempt from entering the Tournament of Power, their angels are actually happy to serve under them. If you look at the character bios, some of them are actually saying that they're inspired to actually learn more about, about these gods.
Exactly.
Right. So that alone tells you there's no real motive here. There's no real motive as far as it being evil is concerned, right? So there's that to consider. And if this were the concept, then essentially what you have is, I like the fact that you brought up Zamasu, Merge Zamasu. Essentially what you have over again is another Merge Zamasu, which I don't see them revisiting. So, it's just, though Dragon Ball has a bad habit of revisiting concepts, I don't see them using this arc, right, which literally came right after the Merge Zamasu arc. Again, that would just be like, well, what's the purpose?
The concept would be the same, because technically speaking, the Zero Mortals plan is in effect now, if you want to look at it, because mortals are being killed off, essentially erased. But here's the thing, so judging based on people saying angels are evil, my question to them is, what about characters like Whis, right? For example, we've never seen Whis ever kind of oppose Beerus to a sense where he had any sort of like devious look on his face, or he even said something that kind of took him out of that character. And I think that going back to that concept, if and only if there was a motive in terms of, the Grand Priest having to set something up to where him and his children can reign supreme over any other being, that they should be the only ones in existence. Well, what about some of the angels, as you just said, that kind of, like their position and they like to do what they like to do in terms of, governing over the gods and being in the position that they're in. Now, I'm not saying that, because even if some of the angels were to rebel against the Grand Priest, I'm sorry to say the Grand Priest mollywops all of them. He's the strongest. So people were saying, well, what about the concept of how the angels feel so comfortable with them having to, realize the fact that they are not going to get erased, as opposed to if they do lose, because they know that their position is safe. So
Right.
I think that, to me, again, going back to the concept, if the angels were evil, I don't see all of them being evil. If anything, this can go back to biblical references to having, a war in heaven, sort of, quote unquote. We can have, some angels remain in their positions and saying, well, I think what you're doing is wrong, while the other angels agree in doing what the Grand Priest may do. Again, this is all headcanon, but if they were to go down that route and say, okay, well, some of the angels are evil while the others aren't, they can easily go back to the Lucifer concept and having Lucifer and his angels, his fallen angels, the demons, having to combat the other angels, the brethrens of heaven. So that would be the literal quote, the war in heaven, right? Because you would have, angels versus angels, Hakaishin turning on. I mean, it'll literally be, a war among the gods. However, I also want to go back to the quote where Goku said, the work of the gods ends here, as we see him tap into this limit-breaking form. So do you think, in your opinion, that has anything to do with what may play out, like, later on in the Tournament of Power, in terms of, there being a motive being revealed and Goku having to put a stop to this work of the gods? Or do you think that was simply a quote to where Goku simply surpasses the powers of the gods? What do you think?
Well, that when I hear that quote, right, I automatically tie it into a potential story.
Okay.
I'm not going to tie it into something that has to do with power. I'm going to tie it to something that has to do with a specific goal that's in mind. At this point in time, it's way too soon to even speculate what that goal is, what this work, or what this, what is that goal that the gods have if they're being erased by default, right? The gods are literally being erased in this tournament. So what is the goal then, right? So I tie it to an actual storytelling from a storytelling perspective. I don't know what it is. I can't really comment on that because I think it's too soon to tell. I will say though, that the whole concept of this whole Lucifer thing, I mean, if you guys, it depends what you guys believe in, but the original concept as to why he was banished from heaven to begin with, or why he fell, was because and he opposed him. Right. Yeah. So it's like, well, at this point, do we have a god, and would you consider Zeno to be that god if there's two of them? I don't think they would take that perspective or that route, to be honest.
Right.
I don't see them waging war amongst each other. I don't see the gods waging war amongst each other. There's really no, the way they've scaled in terms of power, the way they've scaled the angels and the Daishinkan, even the Omni King alone, is like, there's nothing you can do, right? There's literally nothing you can do.
There's nothing you can do. No.
So by default, it kind of goes back to, what is this work of the gods, and what is exactly ending here, right? So then it goes back to, well, we have to see who this mortal is. I feel like it kind of ties into that. If the mortal is Jiren, if the mortal is somebody else from another universe, which I would be okay with personally. I would actually prefer if it was not Jiren, if it was somebody else, and this new level was a stepping stone for him to potentially challenge that person. And it goes back to the concept, why allow for there to be a mortal this powerful to begin with, who supersedes the Hakaishin in general, and then allow him to exist, and then have him there being immortal, when we've seen the Hakaishin, to an extent. You could argue that the fact that they're appointed, they were once mortals, right? So we've seen what this insane amount of power grants a mortal's perspective, or a mortal agenda, or a mortal point of view. It only leads you to be comfortable. So who exactly is this person, right? For him to be able to have this kind of conviction, this kind of control, for him to allow himself not to succumb to evil of any kind, right? So otherwise the Hakaishin would have just Hakai'd him if he was a threat, right? Absolutely. So then you have to consider that. So there's so many things to consider when we just jump the gun to assume that the Daishinkan has a hidden agenda, that the Daishinkan is evil, that the angels are evil. Another thing is I did two videos a long time ago. One was in February. I think they were both done in February. One was a theory going back to how the angels how they potentially came to be. You guys can go check that out. It's an old video. I'll see if I can link it, hopefully. Then there's another video that I did also in February. This is also around the time everybody was trying to say that the Omni King was evil. Right. I did a video called Zeno-sama Explained. There can only be one, right? And I explained the concept of what it means to be innocent, when Beerus referred to his innocence, and to his childlike nature.
And Beerus even told Goku prior to the tournament, he said, "Don't be fooled by his innocence. Like he's more sadistic than you think," and he is.
Right.
The Omni King is very sadistic in nature. I mean, he takes the appeal of a child, but this whole concept of there being evil angels. There's one thing I want to reference, however, and that is the original song. We spoke about this oddly enough in February. It said that there are demons wearing the masks of angels, which ties into deception. And I think that, and I still stand by this, I think that this tournament is not going to end in a definitive, clean slate, one winner. I think that this is gonna end to where it's gonna possibly build into another arc. But within this entire tournament setting, I would like to believe, in my personal opinion, that the true villain is Frieza, because he is the only one with the real hidden agenda, and there's evidence to support that. And
ironically, he has a halo too.
Yeah, he has a halo too. And for me at least, having to look at what Frieza's fighting for, he's not fighting to protect his universe. He's definitely not fighting to protect Goku and his friends. He has a hidden motive, as we saw when he spoke about Beerus. You're not going to reign for long, and he spoke about how, oh, this is the perfect time to manipulate the gods. We see how Frieza is the real person with the real hidden agenda, because there's evidence to support that. There's physical evidence in the anime show, even through dialogue as we see him talking, and I think that I would like to believe that Frieza is the true villain. I think that Frieza definitely has, a hidden agenda in furthering his motives in trying to not only get his life back, but even opposing the gods themselves. Even though how he's gonna do it is beyond me, but I would like to assume that he is gonna be the true villain of this arc just because of his nature. However, again, if going back to Daishinkan being, a villain, or him being the grand, master, puppet controller, I really can't see anyone oppose him. But even with that being said, do you think that the song, the demons wearing the masks of angels, do you think that this has anything to do with the Grand Priest and his children, or is that referencing something else? What do you think?
I honestly, originally back then, we thought that it applied strongly to what's being portrayed in the anime because of that arc, that trailer that we saw before the actual arc came to be.
Yeah.
And they kind of really emphasized the Daishinkan, right? Who is this character? They depicted him as being potentially somebody, the theme song they used Beerus' Badness theme.
Yeah.
It had this, they had this kind of
very
bloody,
eerie,
this
very eerie
grungy,
tone, yeah.
this grungy kind of eerie, ominous kind of thing with the Daishinkan. Now we come to find out that, well, he's just the one hosting everything. So it's natural that people assume that he's going to be the one, pulling the strings here, right? So another thing I want to mention is the fact that there's concept of how potentially the angels are in on this, right? That they know what's going on, how the fact that they never reacted to the fact that once they found out that they would not be erased, they really didn't react to that. Instead, they kind of acted like they knew by default that this would happen.
Right.
This goes back to the concept of when the Omni King originally erased 6 other universes. That's another reason as to potentially why, they knew that they wouldn't be erased. Another thing is to consider where perhaps they came from the Daishinkan himself. I feel like they were created from the Daishinkan. I feel like every angel is a piece of him to an extent, and that's why he's considered to be the father, not the begotten father, but the father in terms of being the primary one. So it all comes back to him, which is why they're so heavily loyal and tied to him, which is why at this point in time, even Whis referred to him as, listen, you must not, he told Goku, you must never do something so rude as to even ask to oppose him.
Yeah.
Because let's just say even I cannot measure up to him, which is a big deal. So then if you want to take that literally into a literal sense and say, well, maybe that's, it kind of ties back to that one moment when Goku felt like he wanted to spar with him. He felt this strong energy coming from him. If you guys want to take that into consideration, that's okay. But at the same time, you guys got to understand something. Whis himself never really knew that these universes are going to be erased, because when the Daishinkan announced the rules as to what would happen in the Tournament of Power, Whis pretty much came to the conclusion. He was like, oh, so what you're saying is eventually is that all of these low-ranked universes were inevitably going to be erased anyway. And the Daishinkan was like, yeah, so Goku's proposal was a perfect opportunity, which tells you that even they have a strict code that they have to go by. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So they could have just erased them, right? But because of plot, they needed a reason to. As Zeno-sama has often said that there are far too many universes. So Goku's proposal was the perfect opportunity, right? So now we get the best of both worlds. We get to get the job done by erasing meaningless and low-ranked garbage universes. At the same time, Zeno-sama gets to be entertained. It's a win-win for him at the end of the day. So the Daishinkan strictly just just carrying on what the Omni King wants. If the Omni King says, I want this to be this kind of a shape, right? The Daishinkan has a better understanding as to what he physically wants and what he, in terms of like a psychological level. If the Omni King, because he's a child, he'll say one thing, but the Daishinkan he'll describe it on a much more detailed level, right? So that's why people feel like, oh, well, the Daishinkan seems to be pulling the strings because the Omni King never really says anything. He just says one thing, and the Daishinkan just comes out of the blue, and he just definitively tells you and describes everything to a T as to how it's going to go down, right? Yes. Well, that's his position. He serves under him, so we can't really argue that, right? So I honestly don't think he's evil. I don't think the Angels, or maybe even all of them, knew this would happen, because again, it goes back to this exhibition match where we even said, this is, it's so in other words, the low-ranked modal universes were gonna get erased anyway. The Daishinkan was like, yeah, precisely. So he figured it out then and there, so he didn't know about it. So it's, it comes back to just one big thing. We're just gonna have to wait and see, honestly.
No, I was gonna say, there are so many theories behind this. There are even some that suggest that maybe the Daishinkan could be some sort of like devious, demon-like character, to where the purpose of this entire tournament was to, not just eradicate all potential competition that may oppose him, but also even, to a degree where some people suggested that maybe, his own children aren't even in on his plan. The fact that he wants to rule and be this singular, I guess you could say overlord of like the entire multiverse. In which case, I don't see that being the case either, because as you just said, that'll go back to Zamasu. And having this come about, if Daishinkan was evil, you're gonna have another merged Zamasu story, in the idea that there was this being that came from the world of the gods who wanted to become the only true god, and then he opposed all other gods, and then all sorts of things happened. But to me, if by some chance Daishinkan was evil, the only logical thing to do is to get the Omni King to erase him or do something along those lines. But even with that being said, I can definitely see the Daishinkan, if he was evil, to be more manipulative than anyone else in trying to manipulate the Omni King, and in which case some people are saying that. So my final question to you is, do you think that the Grand Priest is manipulating the Omni Kings into following his plan just to further get rid of them, or is, as we're all coming to a conclusion, is this all simply just a coincidence based on Daishinkan's facial expression, and especially based on his smile? Because everyone wants to say, we've seen that smile before, we've seen that grin various different times, in the idea that even sometimes, if you look at the way the directors and the producers are, portraying, the Grand Priest, we get to see that half his face is light and the other half is dark. So some people are suggesting that maybe this could be foreshadowing that he is deceptive in nature, in trying to take the appeal that he wants to portray himself as being, humble and being like, a really straightforward person, but in reality, he's really a monster. He's a monster inside, and he has, devious plans to, do his own thing. So, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Honestly, it's way too soon to tell, man. Honestly, and even if let's just theoretically say, if you guys called it, hey, he's evil, all right, it just comes down to the only basis I would say that we have to talk about that is the fact that why have a character reference the Daishinkan having to have the highest battle power, right, in the manga, but in the anime, one of the top 5, right, if he cannot be opposed, right? Why reference his power definitively if he doesn't fight, right? So that tells us that he does fight. And then you would think that perhaps that the other top 4 remaining would be other angels, right? Because Rune stands above the angels at this point in time. So if that is the case, then yeah, we could see that happening. Everything that you guys are saying, everything that you're saying right now that won't happen, could happen, only if that is the case. Why reference his battle power if it has nothing to do with somebody opposing him eventually, right? I would say then it could be 4 other angels. Ironically enough, we have 4 universes who are exempt from the Tournament of Power. Ironically enough, you could say those 4 angels could potentially be the strongest. We don't know. But I think as this tournament progresses, we'll see more. We will be able to tell more. But as far as his face is always like that. The only difference is the Tournament of Power, he's in the world of Void. So when he looks at anybody from an angle, he's going to look by default to be evil. The music that they play in the background is going to make him look evil. It's going to give an ominous tone to it as to what's happening. This is the first time we've seen something like this in Dragon Ball. and this is the first time where Goku realized he done fucked up.
Oh,
you know,
for sure, especially when he looked up on him,
yeah. This whole, you know, this whole piquing his interest of wanting to be the strongest may or may not save everybody. So we're gonna have to wait and see. Honestly, I personally don't believe he's evil at this point in time. I just feel like if it's a god tier character passing down some kind of judgment, then it's justified, because by default he's not wanting to erase these other 4 universes who are exempt because they're living up to the standard. So if he wanted to erase anybody for opposing him potentially, he would erase the highest ranked mortal levels, if anything. Then you gotta ask yourself, it goes back to the concept of, who is this mortal that supersedes the Hakaishin? Why would they allow him to exist if he's a definitive threat? These are the questions that we need to ask before we jump the gun and say the Daishinkan's evil. You know what I'm saying?
I think that for sure. It'll be a really fascinating thing to see him as a villain, because it's just like, wow, okay, how do we stop him? But I don't think that's the case. I've said it before. I think that it'll be another Merge Zamasu like story. But if he does turn out to be evil, that's going to be a shock. I mean, at least to me, because I don't want to think that or assume that it is, because just judging based on, you know, his facial expressions and stuff, I don't think that really suits the narrative until we see something more come about. But thank you, Emosh, for joining me, and thank you all for watching. If you guys have different opinions, if you guys agree and or disagree, comment down below. We would like to know what you guys have to say about this. If you guys believe that he's evil, if he's good, or if in fact he plays a neutral part. Thank you guys for watching once again. If you guys are new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, guys, and turn on notifications. That way you guys can be notified whenever I post a video on the channel. If you guys enjoyed, slap a like on the video. Make sure to go on ahead and subscribe to EmoshIsLIVE. He does lots of other Dragon Ball videos on his channel as well. Thank you all for watching, guys, as always, and we'll be seeing you all in the next video. Take it easy, guys. Peace.